This dilly bean recipe is one that's near and dear to my heart because my grandmother used to make it all the time. I can remember as a kid going over and eating her dilly beans, that and her strawberry jam. So good. So the way that I start making the dilly beans is actually by making the brine. And I do that with 2.5 cups of white vinegar and 1/4 cup of non-iodized salt. Now I'll place this on the stove and bring it to a simmer. While that's heating, I'll cut my beans down to the right size. And I do that by putting them up against the side of another jar, and then I cut it right at about where the shoulder of the jar would be. So I picked one that was really big, which is honestly too mature to be using for this. When you're making these, you really want the beans to be young and tender and not show the little bumps from the beans in it. But for my purposes, I want one that looks a little bit different than the rest of mine. So I've got this one, and I'll be able to use it as my guide for cutting the beans down to the right size. Now what I do is I line up all of my beans with the pointy end on the bottom so that when I cut them, they'll all be the perfect length for going in the jars. It's a little bit harder when you have some like this that do a little bit of a curve. Then I'll take my guide bean and I put that on the very top so that I can cut right where that one is at. Then I'll pull out my guide bean so I can continue to use it. And I'll grab these beans and I hold them tightly, and then I turn my jar to the side and I'm able to kind of work them in. I'll leave my jar on the side just so that those don't fall forward again. And I'll continue to put them in until it's nice and full. I usually start with about 2 pounds worth of beans, and then if I need more than that, I can always add. So then once mine is totally full, I move on to the next jar. And I've found it's best to work with the wide mouth pint-sized jars because then it's a little bit easier to get your hand in there for manipulating it. Now that my brine is hot, I'll add a couple of extra things to my jars. I really like to add a sprig of dill to it, but unfortunately it's so hot now that all of my dill have bolted. So I'll be putting in some of the immature little seed heads, and that will give it some flavor as well as be pretty. I usually take my chopstick and just kind of find a good place to tuck that in. I really like it to be on the side. I don't want it too long, otherwise it won't be able to tuck in very well. And sometimes I'll just put one little sprig in there, sometimes two. It just kind of depends on exactly how big it is and how much space I have. I do like it to be on the side though because I think it looks so pretty. For this next step, I usually have a whole clove, but since today I don't, I'll be putting in a tablespoon of garlic. Doing the clove I think is really pretty, but this works well too. And then I'll add 1/2 teaspoon of dill seed. It's so fun for me to put all these things in here. I don't know, there's just something about adding it to the top that it's just so pretty. And I'll do 1/4 teaspoon of chipotle pepper powder. If you're sensitive to heat at all, then I recommend doing less than that because chipotle pepper powder, while it has a lovely flavor and it's kind of the smoky spiciness, it is on the hot side. And then this is optional, but I like to add 1/8 teaspoon of calcium chloride. This is what keeps the beans from getting soggy. It makes them more crisp. Now I'll add my brine over the top and I'll put this up to 1/2 inch of headspace. Headspace is the space from the top of the food to the top of the jar. That batch of brine ended up doing 5 jars worth, which is great, but I did prepare 6 jars. So I'll make another batch of brine, and then any extra that I have, I'll just put in a jar and put it in the refrigerator because this is only the beginning of my canning season when it comes to my green beans, and then I'll be able to make some more later. Now I'll use a wooden chopstick to remove any air bubbles that might have been trapped in my jars. And I just run my chopstick up and down along the sides of the jar, and that helps to release those air bubbles. I wouldn't want to debubble with anything that was metal because it could scratch the jar. I'll use a clean damp cloth to wipe off the rim of my jars so that if anything got on the edge, that it won't interfere with the seal. Then I'll place my lids and rings on until they're fingertip tight. I'm using Superb lids today. They're my new favorite jar because they do such a good job sealing to my jars. They have this really thick blue seal on them, as well as 5 coats of corrosion resistant coating on them, whatever that is. All I know is it stops it from rusting when I put these in my root cellar. I have a 20% off discount code as well as a link in my description below. Now place these in my boiling water bath, submerged by 1 to 2 inches of water, and I'll process them for 10 minutes if I'm at sea level. Now I'm at 1,200 feet, so since I'm at 1,200 feet, I'll add 5 minutes, so I'll do it for 15. But I won't start my timer until after it starts to boil. Now that my processing time is complete, I turn off the heat, remove the lid, and let it cool for 5 minutes. I place my jars on a heat-resistant surface about 1 to 2 inches apart so that they can cool quickly. I'll leave them there for 24 hours so that they can get a good seal. I can tell that they have a good seal if the center of the lid is depressed down. If it is, then I'll remove the ring, wash them with hot soapy water, and store them in a cool, dry, dark location and use them in the next 1 to 3 years. If any of them didn't seal, I would place them in my refrigerator. And here's the kicker with this one, because it is a pickle, I don't want to eat it for the next 4 to 6 weeks, which is fine because of the level of vinegar that's in there. Along with that, even the ones that are sealed, I wouldn't want to eat for 4 to 6 weeks.